Kia ora, this is Everything I've Learned About Politics Against My Will, Episode 2, Neoliberalism. I'm not going to lie, I think this is going to be the best video I'll ever do because I've hyperfixated on this kaupapa for over a year now. I just want to say, if I was watching this video for the first time with no background context of neoliberalism, I'd need to watch it at least twice because this is big game stuff. 2 years ago, I hadn't heard the word, couldn't define it, and definitely didn't care. But since I started looking into politics, it started popping up everywhere. Academic articles, politician speeches, even TikToks.
And that is neoliberalism.
The principles of neoliberalism.
The era of neoliberalism.
So I thought, okay, I better figure out what this thing is. And it is so important. Neoliberalism is the big overarching agenda. It's a political agenda that sunk its claws into New Zealand as like a guinea pig in the 1980s and other countries around the world. So it has been secretly controlling the game for about 40 years now. So neoliberalism is defined as a political approach that favours free market capitalism, deregulation and reduction in government spending. What is free market capitalism, deregulation and government spending? More hours of reports and papers and articles later. So as a baptism by fire on the academic language, the free market is buying and selling stuff, signing contracts, doing business, where the government doesn't have their grubby mitts involved. The free market says, government, leave us alone, stop trying to control how we do business. Deregulation says, government, because you've tried to control how we do business, you've put too many laws on us, you're holding us back, we need to peel them off. Reducing government spending says, the government wastes too much money on the pension, on hospitals, on schools, on unemployment support. This is all a waste of money. Peel it back, make people pay for themselves. So I did all that and I thought, okay, I think I've got it, but it didn't really sink in and I didn't understand why people would be going so hard for neoliberalism. So I sat on it, kept reading, mulled it over until I felt like I'd really figured it out. And so in this video, I'm sharing how I've structured neoliberalism in my own brain. Basically, there are three things that if you believe these three things, you will be full steam ahead, foot flat, down bad for neoliberalism. Belief number one, companies do it better. At the moment, most of our schools are government owned. Same with our hospitals, our prisons, and part of our electricity companies. Neoliberalism says, sell them off. The government doesn't need to own these things. And if you see politicians talking about privatization, this is what they're talking about. The government selling off things to private companies. And the idea behind that is that if companies are motivated by profit, they will find the fastest and cheapest way to do things. Whereas the government, who's not motivated by profit, is inefficient and just wastes money. And so this is why neoliberalism, as like a whole idea, sits on the right-wing side of the political spectrum, where it's very pro-companies. Companies should be running all these things in our lives, not the government. Companies do it better actually does sound good in theory until you think about where that profit comes from. The United States is the biggest pro-countries company that we have on earth, and most of their hospitals are private companies, which means that the goal of their hospitals is to turn a profit. So when you go to give birth at a United States hospital, you're going to take your baby home and wait for a 30,000 New Zealand dollar invoice to turn up at your house, and a $50,000 invoice if you had a C-section. And neoliberal people say, all good, just get health insurance, which will cost you about 15,000 New Zealand dollars every year each, and then after you give birth, you'll still have to pay about $4,000. And that is what a companies do it better health system looks like. New Zealand has also already test driven this with our prisons, and the Mount Eden Correctional Facility used to be run by a private company called Serco, who's from the United Kingdom. This was back in 2012, and our government ended up having to cut their contract out because prisoners were having fight clubs every week, recorded on cell phones that the guards brought in and gave to them, along with drugs. The guards were caught kicking back playing table tennis, and the prisoners were locked up for way longer than they're supposed to be because they didn't have enough staff. Companies do it better works in theory until you think about the fact that if profit is the driver and people are the cash cow, it's the people that are going to suffer when that cash cow gets milked. Belief number two, regulations are just hoo-ha. Neoliberalism says rules and regulations are just holding our companies back from maxing out their profits. Deregulation says these laws are overkill, unleash us so we can maybe pay our employees more or get more done. Think Resource Management Act, which is the piece of law that controls how you're allowed to use land, rivers, lakes. David Seymour has been saying for ages that the Resource Management Act is overkill, it's too complicated and it's increasing costs. In some cases that's right. I know resource management lawyers who have said that the Act is really complicated and kind of takes a lot of work to get through. But there is a balance that has to be struck because the majority of New Zealanders expect there to be good environmental protection laws in New Zealand, especially given that our international reputation is that we've got this beautiful environment. Because regulations or laws are not just hoha, they're actually protections as well. For example, we have what they call competition laws, which are supposed to make sure that companies play fairly, they don't stomp on their rivals, and they don't get basically control of the whole market, which they call a monopoly. Our competition laws weren't strong enough, and so Foodstuffs and Woolworths have been able to stomp on their rivals, ream New Zealanders for kai, and basically strong arm our suppliers. And now New Zealand pays some of the worst prices in the world for groceries without the wages to match. Another example is our smoke-free laws. New Zealand in 2023 ranked second in the world for having the best smoke-free laws. And last year we got demoted down to 53rd because this government rolled back our smoke-free legislation. And at an international conference we got given the Dirty Ashtray Award for basically being the most full of shit and being the biggest sellouts of the tobacco industry. Because smoke-free laws are not just about stopping companies from maxing out their profits, they're actually protections for our people. And even if you want to think about it from a financial perspective, smoke-free laws actually free up our hospitals and our doctors who don't have to work on as many smoke-related diseases. And it's the same thing with health and safety laws. Requiring companies to provide PPE is hoha and affects their profits, but the alternative is to let our people get injured or die. So the belief that regulations are just hoha doesn't hold up. We need rules on companies and there's a balance to strike. And when our government leans too hard on the pro-companies, max out your profit side, when it goes wrong, it's our people or our taiao that suffer. The third and final belief that would make you think neoliberalism is the way to go, I promise it's nearly over, is that everyone has the same opportunities. Neoliberalism says that as long as we don't have laws that say, like, Māori can't go to university, then everyone has the same opportunities, and if you work hard enough, you can crack it. The flip side of this belief is that if you work hard and don't crack it, you are just not good enough and you didn't work hard enough. Neoliberalism is tunnel vision on you as an individual and refuses to accept that anything else plays a part in deciding if people get head starts or they get held back behind the start line. Neoliberalism says, shh, 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 just shut up and work harder. It doesn't matter if you were exposed to meth in the womb and you went through withdrawals as a child and you ended up in a youth justice facility or got abused in state care versus your colleague who inherited a $5 million property portfolio. If that colleague buys a house before you, it's just because you didn't work hard enough. And working hard can absolutely improve your life. No one would ever deny that. But saying that everyone has the same opportunities is a lie. People should absolutely work hard and try to create the best life possible for your whānau. But it's not the government's job to kick back and say, just work harder. It's the government's job to create a society where even if you don't get head starts, you can still live a good life. People often say, oh, my cousin's friend's uncle cracked it even though he did it. But if it was normal to crack it under this system, we wouldn't be hearing about your cousin's friend's uncle because they would be unexceptional. Of course they cracked it, why would they not? So it's okay for us to accept that not everybody has the same opportunities. It's people's job to do the best with what they have, and it's the government's job to make sure that no matter what cards you get dealt with, you can still live a good life. And any government that says, that's not my problem, is a lazy government. And we've seen this belief play out that everyone has the same opportunities with the National Party, who has removed eligibility for 18 and 19-year-olds to get on the job seeker benefit. They're saying everyone has the same opportunities. Just get a job or mum and dad can pay for you. It doesn't matter if you live in Tokoroa where the mill just shut down and 150 people lost their jobs, or you live in a rural area where the orchard jobs are actually targeted towards backpackers and travellers. Neoliberalism says everyone has the same opportunities, just move to Auckland. So that's how I've structured neoliberalism in my head. 1, companies do it better. 2, regulations are just hoha. And 3, everybody has the same opportunities. And if you believe these 3 things, you will believe that neoliberalism is the way to go. But if you do a bit of scratching under the surface of these beliefs, you'll kind of see that they don't stack up. But for New Zealand politics, the ACT Party is our most hardcore neoliberal party, and the National Party follows closely behind. But interestingly, it was actually the Labour government that opened the doors to neoliberalism. In the 1970s, they kind of drank the Kool-Aid and believed that companies could do it better, and they sold off a lot of what they call state-owned assets, including Air New Zealand. Bad business happened and Air New Zealand ended up owing so much money that there was a risk that they could go under. But obviously we can't just let our major airline crash and burn, and so the New Zealand government ended up putting up nearly $1 billion to basically bail out Air New Zealand and buy them back. Well, most of it anyway. So Labour has switched up and said they're not team neoliberalism anymore, and I would expect that that's part of the reason why. Because if you sell something off to a private company and it's something that New Zealand actually needs, and it crashes and burns, then our country's going to be screwed. So Labour brought it in and National carried it on. But even more interesting is that Winston Peters actually used to be a National MP, and in 1993 he actually turned his back on National and walked away because he didn't believe in neoliberalism. And he actually said in 2017, "The truth is that after 32 years of the neoliberal experiment, the character and quality of our country has changed dramatically, and much of it for the worse." That's big kahunas type stuff. And this explains so much why David Seymour and Winston Peters beef so hard, because they're actually fundamentally opposed when Winston Peters stands on business, which is actually only occasionally. Like, for example, the Regulatory Standards Act, which was David Seymour's 20-year pet project. That's like a super neoliberal policy, which basically tries to clamp down on what the New Zealand government can do and has been described as handcuffing the New Zealand government. Winston Peters signed off on this law, and then 2 days later he came out and said, "Hey guys, if you vote me back in, I'll get rid of it." Like, you don't get to do both. It's giving grandstanding, but then when it comes down to it, actually drop nuts. So overall, that's neoliberalism. It's the big picture, overarching agenda stuff that has been running New Zealand for over 40 years. Actors die hard for it, National's on board, New Zealand First says they're opposed, Labour brought it in but changed their minds, and the Green Party is very anti-neoliberalism, which is why they clash so hard with ACT. This whole kaupapa made heaps of things fall into place for me. I feel like I understand most of the beef now and where these little pieces of hoha law actually fit into the overarching agenda. So hopefully that was all good and not too smushed. Episode 2, Neoliberalism done and dusted. Tēnā tātou.
What do you stand for most of all?
The age is staying at 65.
3 minutes.
Now, what do I stand for?
Yeah, most of all.
I stand for, most of all, a dramatic economic and social change to that which we've had the last 33 years.
Meaningfully.
Well, the last 33 years we had a neoliberal experiment that's just gone so wrong.
No, don't look back. Look forward. Meaningfully.
Well, I want to correct what's wrong, because you cannot go forward unless you fix up what's wrong.